Okay, I think we can get started. Some folks will come in, I'm sure, as we're talking. But today, this is the peer-centered discussion for the Routledge Reader on Writing Centers and New Media, a new book out, edited by Sohui and Rusty here. And I'll let you introduce yourselves. And Rusty's actually got a copy of the book there. Mine's packed away, like I said. Still waiting for our books to arrive. There's the book itself. Very nice.
Yay.
But I'll let you folks introduce yourselves, maybe tell us a little bit about your background in writing centers as well as your interest in writing centers and new media. That'd be a good place to start, I think.
Great. I guess I'll just get started. My name is Sohui Lee. I'm a lecturer in the program Writing and Rhetoric at Stanford University. I'm also the course coordinator for their multimedia classes that they offer for second-year students here at Stanford. And I'm also a multimedia consultant, writing consultant. And for the last 5 years actually, I've also been doing a lot of administrative work until recently. So I've been both assistant director and associate director at the Hume Center for Writing and Speaking. And that had been a wonderful experience. And while I was there, I started their digital media writing program. And that experience had led me to writing this book. And we'll actually talk a little bit more about that book, but I'll let Rusty introduce himself.
Mm-hmm. So I'm Rusty Carpenter. I direct the Knoll Studio for Academic Creativity and am assistant professor of English at Eastern Kentucky University, which is located in Richmond, Kentucky. And I spent a number of years at the University of Central Florida, which is where I received a PhD in text and technology, coordinating their writing center, but I also worked there in a number of other capacities as an undergrad, a grad, and then administrator. So much of my work is in writing centers from nearly every perspective imaginable. But then as I entered grad school, I started looking at writing centers and technology specifically. I had the opportunity to develop a synchronous online consultation program there, which really piqued my interest in the ways that technology and new media help us to extend and advance writing center work. So this has always kind of been an area of interest for me. And then, of course, the Knoll Studio is the perfect place to continue that kind of work with writing centers and new media.
So, yeah, no, that's great.
Three limbs before we get rolling with the questions and the discussion. And thank you both for joining us today. For those of you in the audience, looks like a few folks here. If you want to hook up your microphone or something, that's honestly the easiest way to conduct a conversation. You can, however, type down in the text box and I'll read out what it is that you've done. You don't have to hook up your camera if you don't want to. But I encourage you to, just because it facilitates the discussion a little bit more when we're all using the same medium. But I understand that some of you don't have that ability. If you do hook up your microphone and your camera, you just use the Start Broadcasting button. You can also set it so that your mic isn't always on. That makes it a little easier because we don't get feedback then. You set it to the click to talk feature when you do the Start Broadcasting. Sohui and Rusty, you can leave your mics on because usually that works out just fine for the presenters or the editors, I should say, in this case. But I do encourage anybody in the audience, this is, we try to make this a lively discussion. It's driven by your interests and concerns. So if you do have any questions, throw it out there, either on the text chat or through the audio. But since I set these things up and pick the authors to do this or get folks who gladly volunteer to talk about their stuff, I always like to get my questions answered first. So I'm going to dive right in with my first question is, how are writing centers currently dealing with new media across the board? If you have any sense of that, what are writing centers currently doing or not doing? As the case might be.
Yeah, that's a great question. Sohui, I'll let you tackle it first, and then I'll tag on to it a little bit.
Well, I mean, let me start with, I guess, Stanford's story. So I've been teaching here at Stanford since 2001, and I've always been interested in visual rhetoric and multimodal rhetoric, actually. But I guess I think if you look at that history with Writing Center and new media, it does start with composition in terms of what we were doing in the classroom. And so even before the Writing Center decided to go this route, I mean, I think that a lot of comp instructors were doing that, right? And I think that was part of the motive behind it, maybe, and also just a lot of conversations about new media composition. But I think, at least for us, part of the momentum came because there was a kind of, I kind of call it the kind of tipping point, at least on our campus, where we saw more and more assignments, and also just in general, students having trouble with composing these kind of videos or blogs or websites or what have you. They were asked to do a lot of things that involve, multiple modes of communication, and they weren't really asked to, think about it rhetorically. They're just asked to make it, and so some of the professors would come with some questions about it because they didn't really. I think there were some questions about where they would go for help. We do have multimedia consultants, and they were different. They were actually consultants who work with the technical aspect of production, but certainly not kind of the rhetorical end of it. And so I think there was some of that confusion, but I think just more and more people asking for that. And then also from our end in composition, a growing awareness of what it meant to actually compose something multimodal. I think that kind of all kind of came together, and it helped conceive of something where we would be offering multimodal composition consultations. And then, of course, it was, I think, also wonderful that we saw some leaders in our area that were already starting to think about that, and especially like places like MSU, where they're actually offering consultations that involve multimodal work. Those are things that was, kind of a means for us to kind of say, well, this is something that people are going to do. So I actually did a lot of the research and set up the proposal for our program, and it was really exciting. So I think I ended up like attending multiple conferences across disciplines just to hear what was going on in terms of their movement towards digital composition, and then kind of set the parameters for what we're going to do in our program. And just from my sense of it, talking to others who are doing multimodal consultations in their centers, it's interesting because I think there's still, a large number of writing centers who do not consider themselves, or who are not named a multi-literacy center for a variety of reasons, political and otherwise, but who are starting to see and accept students who are working on a variety of multimodal type of assignments. So, and I think that like writing centers, for example, who see students who are working on research posters. I mean, that's an example of a multimodal product, right? That is still very, very much rooted in the academic work. But it's something that within I think writing center purview. So I think it's just a matter of time. I think that a lot of people are doing it already to some degree, and whether or not we have a center that's named and reflects kind of the kind of work that we're doing, the range of work we're doing, is going to be again a matter of time, but also a matter of politics. But we see a lot more coming out. So there's so many new centers that are either changing their name or kind of revamping or reconsidering the boundaries. And the writing center, our writing center itself, has just renamed itself. So it's called the Hume Center for Writing and Speaking. And they just added that speaking component so that it's clear that there is this kind of oral element of it, and the visual is implied. But yeah, we are now, I think, I would say, a fully multi-literacy center.
Mm-hmm.
Rusty, did you want to add?
Well, you make a lot of good points, and I agree with everything that you said. And from my perspective, we're working in a relatively new studio that was designed for and to promote a sort of a multimodal invention process too. And so there's an important invention aspect about the work that's taking place in many writing centers throughout the country. And one of my goals for this project and others is for us to think critically about how we're using new media to develop initiatives on multimodal composition, but also for us to have some coherent conversations about what that looks like on in the invention process and in the composing process. So we see a number of different projects that are coming through the space as well, and before the Knoll Studio, these projects didn't really have a home anywhere on campus. It wasn't necessarily in the writing center, and there was really no hub for that activity. So I think it's very exciting for writing centers to be able to take the lead and to develop some of these new media initiatives a bit further. And I think it's perfectly appropriate for writing centers or multi-literacy centers or multimodal communication centers to develop those initiatives. A very exciting time for us.
Thanks. Yeah, you mentioned Sohui. You mentioned him at Michigan State University,
Yeah.
and Dave Sheridan and James Inman has the book out. It's multi-literacy centers. I can't remember the
Right, absolutely, right.
But that one, I believe, well, one of the selections is by Dave Sheridan, as I recall, right?
Mm-hmm.
Focusing on that very issue.
Yeah.
And just following along with that is I guess I did a little. There's nothing scientific about this survey I did, so I can't make any big claims about it. But I did survey writing center folks, mostly
Mm-hmm.
out of W Center, asking how many dealt with multimodal documents or multi-literacy, what we consider multi-literacy documents, and it changed over 2 years. I did the first survey in 2011 or 2010, and then the next survey in 2012, and it had grown about the number of folks who had been at least writing centers that were attempting to respond to different types of documents or different types of texts or whatever we want to call them that students are bringing in. But it was still pretty low. It was only like 50%. And it made me wonder, where are these students going? Because that they are producing these kind of documents or texts or whatever. But the more troubling aspect of this is not that they weren't working with these students, because you could say, well, maybe they just aren't seeing those students. But the more troubling thing is even though 50% of writing centers who responded to it claimed that they were working with these texts, there were virtually no training or no staff
Right.
education on multimodal, responding to multimodal documents, or
Right,
working
right,
with
right.
multimodal documents. First of all, I mean, it was like, seriously, it was like 2% of the respondents said that they had any sort of training or required their students to take classes in multiliteracy issues or writing in multiliteracy. So I'm curious, how do you think, you know, even using your text or other texts or something, what kind of curriculum, I know this is a big question, so don't balk on me here. What kind of curriculum or what can writing centers do to better prepare their consultants to respond to writers who are bringing in multiliteracy
You know,
texts?
that's a really, really good question. And I talked to Dave about this issue, and I talked to a lot of others, including Jackie, McKinney. And just to address that first question, you're absolutely right that even if we did and you advertise something like the fact that you are offering like multimodal consultations, I think just even people conceiving of it, whatever their work is, as something multimodal is something that they have to identify, and that somehow they need actual help, in terms of building it rhetorically. That's another thing, because a lot of students, I think they just think it's just a technical thing. I know how to do Photoshop, so I can do it. And they don't think about it as a kind of visual argument that's much more complex. So, I mean, I hear this all the time, in fact. There's students in the multimedia studio, which is, it's distinct from our place, and it's just where all the computers are. It's a computer lab. And they will say that. They'll say, I know how to do X. I know how to do Photoshop. I know how to do PowerPoint. So I don't really need that help. So part of it, I think the hurdle, the students are definitely doing it. The hurdle is helping students think of it as that there is this other kind of, as Rusty says, there's this other inventive process. There's also a rhetorical process. We are communicating, and by communicating, we're thinking about our audience and our situation. How do we communicate that more effectively, more persuasively? So there's that element of it, which they just don't think about on this level. And then the other is convincing, like, instructors, professors, that is something that they actually need, as opposed to just assigning. And when the professors, and my experience has been, when the professors kind of understand that, and they say, oh my God, you can get a lot better product, my students will actually produce better stuff, they jump on the bandwagon and they're very excited. But I remember when I was launching this, it was a lot of, I felt like I was a door-to-door salesman. A lot of knocking on the doors. It's like, hey, we're doing this, and it's like, what do you mean? What are you doing exactly? And I really had to sell it and really explain it to them. And once they saw me try it out with their students, they really liked it. That's when the word started to spread, and we started to get more. But and even then, like that first year, I think maybe I don't know, 15%, 20% of the students who came in were identifying their work as something that required, like, it was a multimodal project that required a multimodal consultant. So I think part of the survey stuff is kind of hard, because sometimes they don't identify it as something that is multimodal and that they're doing that kind of help. They don't think about it that way. It's just like, I have this thing that I'm working on, my professor tells me to come in. Mm-hmm. But I do acknowledge, and I'm quite aware of those numbers, and those numbers are important, right? And I really want to see that survey about the training part. I think that gets me really excited, because it gives us a reason for being. It really does give us a reason for being. I think that there's somewhere deep inside me, there is this fear that is what's really happening. And you're just kind of nailing it on the button, as far as the fact that, first of all, that they're treating any kind of multimedia or multimodal work as just rhetorical work. And it doesn't require additional knowledge or just thought about how, let's say, visual communication works, or how oral communication. I mean, these are different modes, and they do require some thinking outside of just rhetoric. And there needs to be some training involved with that as well. So, and I know it's like the repertoire of things that you have to cover with peer training, peer tutor training, is already pretty dense and packed. So adding this other element is just hugely challenging. But yeah, I think that's that's quite frightful. I think Stanford's solution to that initially right now is that because the way it works here at Stanford is that we have 3 tiers of consultants. So we have peer tutors who are undergraduates, we have graduate tutors, and then at the top we have lecturers. And the lecturers are all people like myself who've taught and who study, let's say, multimedia and multimodal communication. So we teach this, and so we do still have training, and I train them in terms of having readings, having discussions, being uniform in terms of what we're talking about, and so that there are a lot of discrepancies in terms of the way we're approaching it. So that, I think, was important for us. But as far as like fundamentals of understanding how visual communication works, that didn't have to go too far. But I think with undergraduates and with graduates, at least, you know, there may need, depending on how much experience they have and what knowledge base they are, there needs to be probably more just in terms of theory and application. And then, and hopefully, I think our book does provide some grounding, some background in terms of theory, so that they can think about what is it, you know, what really makes visual communication different or distinct from, let's say, our written communication. How would rhetoric be affected, or how would even our approach towards tutoring or consultations be different when we are dealing with these types of products? And so many people, I mean, this is what at least Rusty and I encountered. So many people have already really kind of studied this area and talked about the nature in which writing has transformed, and maybe even discussions about how to think about it pedagogically. We felt that there was a need for a book that kind of brought these things together in an interdisciplinary manner. So there has been some things that's written in our area, and certainly a lot in terms of writing, but the nature of our work is truly interdisciplinary. You know, we work with people from across fields, and I think it's important to have some of the communication theory coming in and helping us, or linguistics, or cognitive science, and all these things kind of come together, I think, to help support the kind of work that we're already doing. And Rusty, I don't want to talk too much, so I'm going to kind of let Rusty have the floor for a little bit, and maybe I'll jump in.
We start in terms of training, and that's a huge question, and I think it's still very much up for discussion and development, which I think is exciting. But we usually start with a scaffolded approach, and so we'll often start with conversations and readings and resources on rhetorical theory, and then build from there. So our consultants will read selections from graphic design, selections from the computers and composition world, and some of the foundational readings. What I really want is for them to have a grasp and a flexibility with the language and with the terms and with the concepts, so they can convey those and communicate those to students. We'll look at some of the foundational work in the field by Cindy Self, and we'll have conversations. I think it's important to bring staff members together for conversations to grapple with some of these difficult concepts, because the consultations the consultations that take place on multimodal projects are complex, and so we have to prepare our staff members to work with the modes in isolation and in combination. And that's a lot of fun, but it's a lot of responsibility too. And we still need to have some conversations about where the academic training, the rhetorical training, and the technology training, the tools-based training, intersect and overlap, and when we need to go in one direction or another. And the conversations, and we think of it often as play with our consultants, can be, it's very revealing, especially when consultants are exposed to new technologies that they've not used before, and then asked to think about them as rhetorical, as Silber might say. There's a selection by Stuart Silber in the book. So moving beyond sort of the functional to the critical and the rhetorical. Those transitions, I think, are so important for our staff members to make. And we want them to be able to make connections too, in thinking about the literature, and thinking about reflecting on the conversations that we're having in training, and to application. And we usually include some reflection time for the consultants as well. What kinds of projects did you see? What were the technologies being used, and what were what went well, and what were some of the challenges? We do a number of workshops on multimodal projects, and quite often administrators are leading those workshops. Consultants might co-facilitate workshops. At times, the consultants are taking the lead. We're able to see groups of students grappling with these mediated projects in these collaborative settings, and a lot of times we'll reverse engineer and take those ideas out into the one-on-one and the small group consulting spaces. And so that, for our program, being able to look at those different pieces has really helped us to fit our training and develop the training and the resources that consultants will need to rely on for effective consultation.
Yeah, and can I jump in here? Your great description of what you guys do just reminded me how important that when we're kind of training, that we don't train only to a very specific type of software or technology, because things are changing so much and so very quickly that it could, I think it can very quickly be outdated. So, I think our approach has always been to obviously be aware of like the current type of technology that are being used and the kind of the needs that they have, but also at the same time, this is why it's not strictly technical. I mean, you really have to step back and think about the kind of rhetorical element. Again, rhetoric I think fits in very well, but also certain theories of, as Rusty pointed out, design is very central. And right now I teach a course called Information Design, and it's about design of infographics. And and you can use a range of tools to kind of make it, but I think the focus here is really about design principles and how they are rhetorical. And so it's a kind of merging of design and rhetoric. And I think those are kind of fundamental ideas that would be helpful for writing centers if they are, venturing into this area. And I think that's what we try to do also in our book, which is to introduce and incorporate some theories that might be outside our proper purview in terms of like composition studies or in writing center studies, which is like Works by Christ, and which is familiar for some people, but I think may not be well read amongst a lot of people in writing center studies. And others, I think those types of works are foundational and really important to helping us kind of rethink, aspects of design that are kind of outside of rhetoric in some ways, but also can be seen through the lens of rhetoric too.
Yeah, that talking specifically of technology brings up another question for me, but I certainly want to folks here who are in our audience, please feel free to either type in your question, or Jessica's hooked up to her microphone. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, please do. But I've got one more question that I'm burning to ask on this, because it's related to what you've just talked about, is how do you prevent a writing center from just becoming a tech health center then? Dave Sheridan wrote about that in the Multiliteracy Center, and I think Yeah, and I know it's in there, but I'm curious, because oftentimes, whenever we do anything with technology, it's often sort of always brought down to almost the lowest common denominator. That it's always going to be about, how to use the technology in the sense of just functionally using it versus how to use the technology to create a rhetorically sensitive and aware multimodal document in the media.
May I jump first, Rusty? That's such a great question, and it reminds me of the age-old battle that we have with grammar. Which is like, oh, how do we become, like, stop being a grammar center and talk about rhetoric. And I feel like those are not completely, you can't really completely separate it. And I don't know if you really want to. I think that, like, certain things, you can't really imagine its rhetorical ability unless you understand the technical way in which you can construct it. I mean, PowerPoint is a prime example, for example. Like, if you don't really understand how the animation function works, and if you just decide that that's something that you absolutely don't want to do, then that's just kind of one tool that could potentially be a very powerful rhetorical tool that is just left out. And that could be a choice that you decide to do, but it also is also limiting, and you have to know that. And so I think that, like, I used to be of the camp in the past, I think, that yes, there's this divide, that technical help, you go and get that technical help, and we do this other thing, we do rhetoric. And I'm actually, I feel like I'm moving more towards in agreement with Dave Sheridan on this. And Sheridan is, I think his argument is really that you can't really separate the two. And I have to agree with him. I think that those two really, I don't know if they ought to be separated, and that one does need to have some technical background, and you have to, as a result, I think this is what's so scary about writing centers, is that that you have to accept it in some ways, embrace it, and also keep up with it, which is a huge responsibility. It's a huge responsibility. Keep up with it in terms of actual materiality, in terms of actually having updated software, and that's costly. And then the other one is just like knowledge base, like training. The new Photoshop, that's out is, it does different things. And so, to what degree do we do that? I think that's a big question. I don't know if I have an answer to that, but I think that for me, I feel like there's a certain level of obligation, like I have to be updated, I should be current about what's happening with the software as well, and what's happening in terms of the blogosphere, or, the new tools that are out there. But so going back to that question about, like, grammar, I think that people have different feelings about it. Some people say, absolutely not, we're not going to treat any kind of grammar question, and then and tell them this is not what we do. And then the others, who are a little bit more, kind of moderate about it, who would argue that if the student really needs help and they're asking about grammar and even sentence level work, maybe we shouldn't completely deny it and say, okay, I will help you here, but let me show you that there's a pattern in your writing, and guide them gently towards thinking about the bigger picture of their writing and their writing style. I think that, for me, anyways, that's kind of more ideal. Like, if they're coming in thinking this is a grammar workshop and this is where they're going to learn about grammar, I'm not going to completely say no, leave this place. I'm going to say, yes, I can help you with that, but let me show you the big picture and why you need to really understand passive voice or whatever. And I think that could be the same with writing centers that do kind of maybe welcome some people who do have these quote-unquote technical help, but they actually, when you see this, they need more than technical help. They need rhetorical help. And I think that we can always kind of slide that in there, and then they'll have a better sense of what they're really doing. So, that's how I would see it. I would say that even if people did come in for, the thing at Stanford is that we do have, it's a kind of an institutional history. We have people who are very specifically assigned to do, technical support. And in a way, that's kind of easy for us. If people really just, that's all they wanted, they can actually get that. But I think that consultants should have some knowledge in order to work with that. If someone had a kind of a small technical question or even a bigger one, that we should be able to work with it. but also guide them towards, like, working on how they're making an argument with that project.
Yeah, and we we follow a very similar path, and it's usually a matter of what the student hopes to accomplish with the technology, and then a conversation about the technology. So how what are you hoping to do with this project, and then a conversation about some of the details of how to use a particular platform. And it's interesting that, and I think we started off with the idea of technology as the new grammar in some ways. It's really, I think, should be a conversation about the goals for the project, and then a look at or consideration of the available technologies to achieve a persuasive, rhetorically effective text. And so often we see students, students coming in who have a particular technology that they're familiar with, and an affinity for that technology, and at some point it's a matter of backing up and taking a wider perspective, or viewing this, the project with a wider angle lens, and then focusing in on how they can achieve a rhetorically sound, technologically sophisticated project by considering all of the available tools as part of that conversation. But I agree. There is this. It's very tempting, I think, for students and maybe even the university community to see the Writing Center as a fix-it shop for technology if or when we open the doors to multimodal projects. For us, it comes back to that conversation about designing effective projects, and for students to have an experience. I've been thinking more and more about the value of students coming into the Knoll Studio and being exposed to technologies that they may or may not have seen either elsewhere on campus or in their high schools. For the students who are coming here and having their first sort of Writing Center experience here in the Knoll Studio, and I think that can be powerful as well. Here, what are the different ways that these technologies can be used and developed for the projects in your classes? So just kind of a few different perspectives there.
Thank you. Anne and Stacy, and who else was here? Stacy was here, Anne was here, and Jessica. I don't know if you all have any questions or comments, but again, feel free to jump in. I'll pause a little bit to give you a chance if you want to say something.
It looks like Jessica is talking, but I cannot hear her.
All right, try that. Can you hear me now?
Jessica, let me
yes.
see if...
Okay, this is somewhat of a messy question, but I'm going to try to jump in there. We've talked a little bit about the audiences outside of the center, trying to get students to see that they can bring multimodal projects, or getting faculty to integrate multimodal projects into the center. But my question is kind of, how do we get tutors on board with this? We talked about training, and I'm not necessarily talking about the nuts and bolts of training as much as, we here at Tau Center are starting to develop an online writing center. I'm pretty new here, actually. This is my first fall. So I've been doing a lot in sort of social media and trying to get us into some of these new softwares and stuff like that. But I'm sensing a bit of hesitancy from my tutors, a vulnerability, if you will. And I think this speaks a lot to the culture of writing that we have on campus, as well as maybe in the center. But do you guys have advice for how we can get tutors to buy into multimodal assignments, to get off of the sort of page and the written assignment and embrace these sort of things, and not feel vulnerable because they don't have the sort of expertise that they think that they should have in the software or multimodal assignments in general? What can we do to make them more comfortable?
Mm. Well, let me ask you this, Jessica. When you guys recruited tutors, were you explicit about having them do kind of multimodal consulting, or would you say that they were recruited primarily as writing tutors?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is the first round of hiring that I have been a part of, and since we've been here, we're not as explicit now that you mentioned it as we probably should. That's probably part of it. The other thing,
yeah, because I think that they may be a little bit surprised if they are coming in the very beginning. I mean, I think so. Your question's still really good, and I think it's very valid. But I think also it's like the way you're marketing it, and their just expectations of it could be different, right? Because if they're thinking, I have really strong writing, this is what I do, all of a sudden I'm asked to kind of work with visuals and other stuff, they may definitely have a little bit of just maybe they might be surprised. But.
Yeah, we always include the wide range of projects that consultants might expect to see coming through the space as part of their job. And we also explain that writing and composing, writing isn't always paper, and the composing process isn't always on the table on a printed out a sheet of paper. And that's also important for our consultants to keep in mind as they work with students early on, before projects even take any particular form, because it's part of our pedagogy. It's the pedagogy is out there, and it is by design multimodal, and it can be high tech and it can be low tech, or a mix, or first low tech and then high tech. And so it's very important to have that conversation with the staff members. And our expectation for consultants isn't necessarily for them to come in as technological experts, because what we're doing is not the same as what IT experts would be doing. But what I do ask is for them to first of all, think critically about technology and how it can be used and integrated, but then also to ask them to think creatively about the ways that technology can be used. And those are complementary perspectives, interrelated perspectives. And I also ask them I don't necessarily want to use the word embrace, but I want them to, I want them to embrace the learning process. I want them to want to learn technology and experience new technology, and I think that's very healthy for their growth and development.
One thing that you guys can do, I would think, is you might want to pick up like a familiar genre, a genre that the students might be familiar with, in terms of some kind of multimodal composition work that's very popular. I mean, one example, I think probably one of the more popular ones would be something like PowerPoint. Okay, and they're all kind of familiar with it to some degree, but also just bring that up and ask them to do something with it, and then talk about what parts of it transfers over to, so you can map on the things that you do that's similar to writing and compare it to what you would do in slide composition, and maybe elements that are kind of different, and maybe have that as a kind of a moment of discussion, because I think that what would help them a lot is just understanding that there are certain fundamental things that they do that does map on to kind of visual composition. But there's also other stuff. So it would definitely, that would be one way of doing it, and then complementing it with readings that are related to design. That would help them kind of actually get very specific terms that they can use to talk about the things that are going on visually that might not be within our kind of specific kind of rhetorical language right now. It's not in our rhetorical lexicon, but certain basic kind of design principles are definitely useful as language or terms that they can use. But yeah, I mean, just taking something that's familiar and making them kind of have that conversation so that they can see that they can do that, and would be really helpful, and especially stuff that are being brought into your writing center. They're just, I mean, for us, like there's a very specific genre of things that come through all the time, and there are some that are just really different. But generally, it's going to be like PowerPoint, it's going to be research posters, and then there's like web design or something like that, and video. Those are the four. So if that's what you guys cover, and depending on what you guys cover, I would just kind of target certain things and make it part of your tutor training.
And I noticed that Jessica brought up memes, and we've had discussions about memes, and they're often very lighthearted, but those discussions can be quite powerful too, because they're prevalent. You know, they're out there, and we see them all of the time. So it might be one place to start.
And that can be fun for them to do. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks for the advice. I really appreciate it.
And while you were talking about that, I was interested in, in thinking of terms of age ranges and whatnot. I know both of you are at more traditional institutions where most of your students are traditional college age. I know that's a bad sweeping assumption, but I'm just guessing that. But I'm thinking in terms of places like where I work at a community college, where we have a much wider range of students, and most of our average age is still 26, 27. We still have a sizable amount of traditional age college students, but there's also a lot of folks who are returning to college either because they lost their job or they're getting retraining, that sort of thing, who are older and who seem to struggle more with technology stuff. But then again, I also wrote down that we make a lot of bad assumptions about millennials, so-called millennials, and their ability to use technology.
Right. Yeah.
So, to some extent, I think Jessica tutors, if they are traditionally college age, they might be just as leery about using technology or feeling like I suddenly have to be an expert, right? Which kind of flies in the face of, writing center theory practice that, to some extent, they don't have to be an expert on writing. They don't have to be an expert on this technology either. That's just a comment. I don't know. Does it make you
Yeah, no. I mean, again, that kind of goes back to our earlier discussion about how much should you know, and I don't think that they need to be experts at it, but I think they should be familiar with the tools to some degree, and so playing around with the tools help. And one way of helping it too, making you feel more comfortable, might be like having maybe have one of these consultants come in, the kind of tech consultants, the IT consultants or whoever, and have them work with some of the consultants in terms of, this is the tool, let's just practice on it, and let's make something with it. So even if they've never done, let's say, Photoshop, for example, maybe make them do a kind of Photoshop workshop with an IT person, just giving them the tools, and then have someone else who works with rhetoric to kind of have a conversation about, well, how did we, knowing these tools now, how does that change how you kind of make things? And then have a conversation about how does that change the way you think about, when you're working with your consultants. I don't know. I mean, I don't think that they need to be experts, but just knowing what the tools are, it could be, I think, a huge boost in terms of confidence, but also just familiarity with it, to recommend, oh, you might want to try this other thing if you really wanted to do this effect, because I know you want to make this kind of statement. So yeah, I think for us, I think that I think it really depends on what your center is after, and also just in terms of resources, right? You might not have IT people available, or you might not have these tech specialists available, but if you can, I think that it's a wonderful way of kind of merging the two, because I think they're also, the people who are in IT, they're also very interested in what we're doing. Really interested in kind of the rhetorical angle. I've had many conversations with the technology specialists who are absolutely excited about what I'm doing, and I think this is just an opportunity for deeper collaboration between these people who are what we think of as like the compartmentalized IT specialists or software specialists, and what we do. I think that there's a way of joining forces here so that we could complement the things that they do. And they can, if they have students who are coming in needing rhetorical help, they can really guide the students in our direction as well. So having like really, maybe this is an opportunity for, better collaboration and also kind of communication between the two groups if there are, software IT people on campus.
And I think that goes for other areas on campus as well. We've seen a lot of interest in multimodal communication from other areas on campus, from the College of Education to psychology to a variety of other areas, and there's a huge opportunity for collaboration there as well.
Mm-hmm.
We've got just a few minutes left, and kind of want to think about the future, in terms of the work you're doing. And writing centers, and I'm thinking of Jackie McKinney in the Peripheral Visions in her final chapter. She talks about, to some extent there is some amount of danger of writing centers ignoring what's over here on the peripheral vision, such as, I don't think it's necessarily peripheral, this multimedia, new media stuff. I just think it's a reality that many people are ignoring. I think we're seeing the last of the traditional so-called collegiate essay. I think it's pretty much dying. It's death on the beach, I guess, in some ways, because it is literally, it's just not going to be done. Probably in 50 years, you won't even see that. It'll be seen as this sort of archaic thing that they used to do, much as like we would look at texts from the 19th century, genres that don't really exist anymore, or are only done in a very, very narrow area, lots of students not doing it. But what do you see as the future for writing centers, and how do we best shape that direction where we still remain at the center? Because ultimately that's what McKinney's worried about, is that we lose relevance, we lose importance, because we're literally tying ourselves to I'll use another analogy, tying ourselves to a sinking ship that's on the beach somewhere, maybe, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Rusty, did you want to take it, or do you want me to? I don't.
I think that's a very interesting point and a valuable question, and I don't know that new media or multimodal composition can be seen as peripheral. We're seeing it as at a variety of institutions, at a variety of contexts, from research ones to smaller liberal arts colleges. And I think we need to see it as a central part of the conversation, especially looking at some of the 2012 and 2013 work that has come out on multimodal composition, and has made the argument that writing has always been multimodal. So I think it's important that that we look back at that and think about what it means for us.
Yeah, I guess maybe, Clint, what you were referring to is like being tied to a sinking ship. Is that traditional writing, right, that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think so. The traditional sort of college essay that it seems that, 100% of writing centers work with, text that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's going to, I guess I don't think that it's going to completely go away. It's kind of like a radio. Never died when TV came, and that old remediation thing. So I think that there's just more competing channels of communication, and I think that students have to be more, or writing centers. I agree with you that I think that they have to be more flexible about the way in which they're supporting the way that academic communication is happening now. And if they don't do that, then they are very much in danger in the end, because their funding is only going to happen when they're supporting the kind of academic writing that's happening. And I think that as the academic writing starts shifting, there's still going to be room for writing, but I just don't know if they're going to be at the center as much as they used to be. You're absolutely right. Yes, and the other point I wanted to make is that I think what is really exciting, at least from my viewpoint, is that new media type of consultations actually bring the center back into far more prominence than it ever was before when it was just focused on writing. So here at Stanford, for example, when I started introducing new media, people, I'd say like 60% of the students that were coming in for new media work, sorry, I just lost here, 60% of the students who were coming in here, they never came to the center. These are all CS kids and other students who didn't think they did writing, but when they were thinking about their oral presentations or research posters, they realized, oh, this is a form of writing that I didn't really think about. So, this is just an opportunity for us to really kind of bolster the foundation that we already have with writing. It's an expansion of our work, and it certainly is not, I don't think it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game here that you have to do this or not have it. But I think that having some of it is helpful. Maybe some centers won't, I think it depends on the institution. I think some centers just maybe won't have as much as others. But I think you're absolutely right that the ground is shifting. And the reason why, I was telling Rusty this, the reason why that writing centers were a little bit later in the game in terms of picking up new media, I think partly it has to do with the fact that we are responsible to our clients or the people that come to see us. And when that starts shifting, that is when writing centers respond. So we're kind of responders to our environment, and I think that the digital environment is certainly going to be the one that's going to shape what we're going to be doing in the future. Okay, I think we're done, right? Okay. I couldn't hear you, Clint. I think I lost him.
Whoops, sorry about that.
Uh-huh.
There, I'm back. My button didn't stick on. Anyway, our Elvis back here.
Okay.
Over here. Our time is up, but I want to thank Sohui and Rusty for coming and discussing today, and all of you for participating. An excellent book. I'm actually looking into using it next year in our Writing Center class, just because we have nothing, there's nothing, literally nothing that deals with writing centers and new media. And again, this is, I think it's a very beneficial text, and hopefully we'll be able to make some big progress in the next few years towards integrating new media and writing centers.
Clint, stay in touch with us, okay? We'd love to hear your feedback in terms of how you were using it and what you thought was useful, and if you had any idea, just feedback in terms of the way your students were responding. If they're mostly undergraduates, right, who might be using it?
Yes,
right. So yeah, I'm kind of curious. So it is kind of, some of it is a little bit denser theoretically, but I think some of them are really could be really helpful and accessible. Even like Manovich, I think is quite accessible. So. Okay.
Yeah, I sure will. I sure will, and it's always interesting because I've given essays, particularly in the Writing Center class, that are challenging like that, and it's surprising how many students really step it up and understand and try to get into it. And they find it very interesting that they're reading technically graduate level stuff, and it's like, yeah, sure.
Right.
So anyway, thank you again, Rusty and Sohui.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.